All right, thank you for taking the time to join us on the program today. And it's still Global Matters coming to you from AIT. My name is Tunde Alabi. Thank you for your time on the show today. Since severe floods in Nigeria since September have caused the death of over 600 people and displaced more than 1.3 million from their homes, Nigeria's National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, had warned of massive flooding that will sweep through 14 states in Nigeria from rivers Niger and Benue. NEMA, working with the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, listed Adamawa, Taraba, Benue, Niger, Nasarawa, Kebbi, Kogi, Niger Delta, Edo, Delta, Anambra, Cross River, Rivers, and Bayelsa states that will be hit by this massive flooding. However, the absence of adequate prevention and management strategy in Nigeria, like in many other African countries, led to human and economic losses when parts of Nigeria were overrun by flood. NEMA and the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency have again warned that there will be more floods, indeed, more devastating flood in 2023. A report had said climate change is responsible for the ravaging floods. As the world concludes its meeting at the United Nations Climate Change Conference COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh on Friday, 18 November, COP27 President Sameh Shoukry had, during the pre-COP engagement, highlighted flood-related issues with particular reference to Pakistan and Nigeria, among other nations, as one of the key issues on the agenda during the conference. African delegates at COP27 pushed for laws and damage compensation from developed nations, energy transition, food security, climate finance, and biodiversity conservation. A major concern is the attitude of developed nations towards the plight of the less wealthy countries caused by climate change. In 2009, developed countries pledged $100 billion climate finance fund to help developing countries by 2020. The promise was broken and the money not redeemed. Now, will COP27 redeem the image of developed nations from the promise 30 years ago? Why are these countries reluctant to support financing efforts that will help countries adapt to and mitigate the impacts of climate change? Joining us from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt is our environment editor Nkoli Omohoudu and Sriram Madhusoodanan, the international strategy director, Taproot, on the show today. But before I bring in my guests, let's go on this very short break. When we come back, we'll continue with the program. Don't go away.
The report examined commitments, goals, and ambitions of 3 African countries, Nigeria, Uganda, and South Africa, particularly at the 26th Conference of Parties on Climate Change, which held in Glasgow, Scotland, and how the countries have fared. It, among other things, revealed a lot of policy inconsistencies on the continent, raising the need for greater climate actions that align with climate policies. As recent extreme weather events reveal, Africa carries the biggest burden of climate change, despite contributing just about 3% to global greenhouse gas emissions. This, according to climate activists, call for concerted efforts towards addressing the challenge. The report, put together by Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPA, Africa Institute of Energy Governance Uganda, and South Africa Climate Action Network, also provides a guide for African group of negotiators to advise climate justice for the continent at the ongoing COP27.
All right, thank you for taking your time to join us on the program today. On the show, we're taking a look at the policies of climate negotiation, and at COP27, world leaders have come together to probably provide some solutions to issues around climate change. More importantly, among the issues that are very crucial to African nations, has to do with the issue of wealthy countries being part of some kind of loss damage compensation to less wealthy countries. But we do know that in 2009 they did promise $100 billion, which they never fulfilled. But joining me now to look at some of the issues on the program is Sriram. Sriram is of the Taproot, and he is the International Strategy Director. Sriram, thank you for taking your time to join us on the program today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Sriram, how would you look at the some of the decisions? I know COP27 is ending today in Egypt, but the overview of this meeting, how would you consider the meeting since it started and possible influence or impact, especially for developing nations?
Yes, I mean, I think you spoke to a lot of the issues just at the beginning here, right? There's a very clear, both in Nigeria, Pakistan, many other parts of the world, this past year has very clearly shown us the kinds of loss and damage impacts that we're seeing that are being fueled by climate change. So coming out of COP26 last year in Glasgow and into COP27 here in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a very clear demand from developing countries, including the African group of negotiators, as well as civil society around the world, for rich countries to agree to the establishment of a fund to address loss and damage. Now, unfortunately, you mentioned we're nearing the end of the talks were actually supposed to end just about now, but they are getting extended because the fact of the matter is that rich countries, particularly the US, are blocking consensus, and they're refusing to agree to establishing a fund for loss and damage, which is utterly shameful given the US is one of the largest, if not the largest, historical emitter of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions.
I mean, going by some of the decisions reached, especially the issue that the decision or resolution that has to do with compensation, loss, and damage, climate change. You remember in 2009 when these countries pledged $100 billion to mitigate some of the effects of climate change by 2020. This is 2022. They never fulfilled the decision, and some African countries are very skeptical about some of the decisions that may be reached at this meeting. What are your thoughts and your feeling?
I think that the African countries and people are very right to be skeptical of this process, particularly because there's a question of whether or not it's fit for purpose, right? The issue of loss and damage and adaptation, climate mitigation, has not just been on the agenda since 2009 or the last 5 or 10 years. This has been on the agenda for the last 30 years. It's been very clear that if we do not mitigate our carbon emissions, particularly the rich developed countries doing that first in an equitable way, that the kinds of climate impacts, the losses and damages that we're seeing are only going to accelerate. So I think it is very much the ball is in the court of the US, right? President Biden is here saying that America is back in, that it is ready to be a climate champion. Well, if it's ready to do that, it needs to walk the walk and not just talk about its supposedly 1.5 aligned goals. It is continuing to be one of the largest oil and gas producers. There's massive expansion that's happening. It's investing in false solutions like carbon capture and storage, which communities that we work with in the Gulf South are seeing a massive expansion and build out happen there, on top of the existing extraction of oil and gas projects that has been happening there for many decades. And beyond that, I think it's really time for the US to commit not just to getting out of the way of blocking consensus, but to make sure it's coming to the table with the money and paying up for the compensation, not just at this COP, but for past commitments that it's made for climate finance.
Sriram, do you have an idea why some of these wealthy nations are reluctant to pay some of their pledges? Are they worried that the final beneficiaries of some of this money may not get the money as a result of either corruption, mismanagement? What are some of their concerns? Why are they reluctant?
You know, that's a good question to ask them. I think time and time again, these are the kinds of excuses that we hear from them, but they find it well within their wherewithal to announce programs like the Global Shield program, which in essence is an insurance program, right? So it seems like the US and other wealthy countries are perfectly fine to set up a quote unquote fund where they get premiums that are paid in from poor developing countries, but unwilling to commit to a fund that is actually addressing the loss and damage that they played a huge role in fueling, not just through their fossil fuel emissions, but being one of the critical blockers of climate action for well on now 3 decades. I think the other thing is that they're really enabling the presence of the fossil fuel industry here. If you've seen COP26, there was a report that showed that there's more than 630 lobbyists in the halls. It's really looking more like a trade show than a place where critical and urgent policy to address the climate crisis is being decided.
Absolutely, it's getting more like a trade show. We've seen 1 or 2 African countries not really, or some countries not participating in COP27, saying, look, what is it all about? The last agreement they never fulfilled. Nothing serious has actually come out of it. My next question to you is, when we talk about, the COP27 president, Sameh Shoukry, spoke about flood in Pakistan and flood in Nigeria. It does appear now that this extreme weather condition in Nigeria, there's been this prediction that 2023 is going to be flooding in 2023 is going to be more devastating. And if you look at what is happening around the world, especially what happened in Pakistan lately, flood has become a major disaster impacting negatively on people. Beyond this talk show of COP27, those promises, are there ways the world, or even some of these countries, including Nigeria and Pakistan and their neighbor, can mitigate the effects of extreme weather conditions, such as flood?
You know, I think this gets to the heart of one of the critical issues here, which is that in order to adapt or deal with loss and damages that are being changed because of a lack of mitigation many years ago, the countries need resources, right? And this shouldn't just be in the wake of disasters, but this should be ongoing. It should be predictable. It should be new and additional to the commitments that have not been fulfilled, as you're mentioning, on adaptation and others. And it must be public and grant-based, right? We don't want this to be creating another loan or debt structure that leaves African countries and other developing economies that are feeling the worst impacts of climate change more indebted to the banks or rich countries as a result of the funding the fund that will be set up out of COP27. So I think these are critical issues. The U.S. is really trying to block it entirely and trying to say, oh, well, we'll just have another talk shop for another year. But that is exactly what happened in the past year since Glasgow. So I think the question is really for the U.S. delegation. They've had a year to discuss this issue. They've had 30 years to know that loss and damage is happening. Why can't the richest country get its act together and commit to a loss and damage finance facility that the world can see is utterly necessary?
Right. Let me ask you to stay with us. Sriram, let me go to environment editor, who is also in Egypt at the moment, COP27. Nkoli, thank you for taking the time to join us on the show. Do I have Nkoli on our Zoom? Nkoli is not in yet. All right. Okay, while we're trying to connect with Nkoli, let me get back to Sriram. Sriram, thank you one more time for your time on the show. Let's get back to what is happening in the U.S. and the attitude of some of these big countries, the U.S. and United Kingdom. These are big players in the global industries, yet not trying to play their role. There are ways developing nations that are produce less carbon carbon that affect the environment. Are there ways they can force the big nations, the wealthy nations, to play a big broader role in helping them to mitigate some of this effect? Are there things African and other Asian countries can do to force the big players to comply?
Yes, I mean, I think that's very much what they are and have been doing these last 2 weeks. You know, the largest negotiating bloc here at the conference of the parties in COP27 has been really holding together very strong solidarity, demanding, and I think really, I should note, led by many African countries and small island nations who are seeing firsthand the impacts of climate change on their communities and their people, are holding the line and saying, we are not going to leave COP27 without an agreement to a fund. Now, I think that the question is whether the U.S., given President Biden is trying to claim that he is stronger on climate than his predecessor and that he's a climate champion, whether that's going to eventually change because it's clear already that the U.S., with the backing of the EU, is very clearly blocking agreement on this. You know, this demand for loss and damage funding is not new. It's been there for a very long time. Civil society has been united. Developing countries have been united, and I'm still left asking the question, with a year to prepare, how come the U.S. seems to have no better alternative than like, well, we'll just keep talking for another year? It seems like, you know, the State Department and the U.S. government, if they want to be truly seen as global climate leaders, can do a lot better than that.
Before I let you go, Sriram, my last question to you. COP28 is coming up, will be coming up very soon. What impact will COP27 have before COP28 on climate change, on extreme weather conditions impacting on poor countries? What impact do you think COP27 will be? Or it's just, as you said, a talk show, and we'll come COP28, nothing will happen again? Share with us your thoughts and mine. Sriram, are you there? Is Sriram there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think I will say, you know, having in the final hours, in the 11th hour, we know the negotiations are getting extended. So this will go to the big plenaries, and I think that, you know, again, the countries have been very clear in making the demand for a fund to be established at this COP, because we know, per some of the IPCC's latest report, that the kind of climate impacts we've been seeing from Pakistan to Nigeria are just going to accelerate, right? These are going to get worse. There's been drought and horrible famine for almost 5 years in East Africa. And so that's why it is so essential for a fund to be decided at this COP. And then what many countries are calling for, with the backing of civil society, is for that fund to be operational very, very soon, in order to meet the growing number of climate-induced disasters and impacts that we're seeing around the world. So I think the big question will be, do we leave 27 with the Sharm el-Sheikh fund for loss and damage finance, or will this go down as the COP where the U.S. blocked consensus and turned a cold shoulder to the needs of communities around the world that are feeling the impacts of the very fossil fuel pollution that the United States has been responsible for driving for decades.
Thanks a lot. Awesome. Sriram is the International Strategy Director of Taproot. They are involved in civil society, involved in environmental issues, and they are actively part of COP27. Sriram, International Strategy Director, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. Your time very appreciated there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All right, let's quickly join Nkoli now for the few minutes I have left. Nkoli, thank you for joining us on the show. Let me ask you, what will be your takeaway from COP27? I know probably by now it would have rounded off. What will be your takeaway from that event? Nkoli?
So let me do that just now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
All right. So my takeaway from here, you said maybe by now you would have rounded off, and
Yes.
I'm telling you that it's not anywhere close to rounding off.
Wow.
Because the plenary session, the last one, really has been holding since yesterday, late into the night. And today also, it has been going on. They called for adjournment, went to rest, came back again. You have the co-facilitators, you have the UNFCCC office and the presidency office of COP27 all putting heads together. Now there's a draft document that has already emerged from this COP, which has galvanized some of the issues and discussions that have happened here in the last 2 weeks. And that document is being interrogated as we speak, because so many people, so many parties to this convention believe that some of the issues they expected to see at that document were not there. The ones that they didn't expect to see resurface, particularly some of the issues that they thought they had dealt with in 26, they also found them in that paper. And one of the major issues, I should like Lam said earlier on the show, is the fact that loss and damage came on strongly at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, but was vehemently kicked against. That is creating a fund, a kind of a body that will manage funds that will be brought by higher income countries to help those in the developing world, those poorer countries who are greatly impacted by climate crisis, to adapt to some of the issues that they are facing, or better still, mitigate against them, because it is assumed, or it is believed, not assumed, it is believed that, Africa, for instance, contributes just very significant, percentage of the climate crisis we are having, because the possible we have on ground, we have not even developed to the extent that the developed countries have developed. They bring in their companies here, their fossil fuel companies, extract our oil, use it to build pyramids, build skyscrapers, develop at an alarming. Then we now feel the impact. Don't forget that environmental issues don't have any boundary. And what it means that whatever happens in the US can affect anybody down south. So that has been the issue here. So now, that document, that's the outcomes of this COP27, is being interrogated at the moment. And I can tell you that it will last well into the night, even tomorrow, if possible, because all the countries, all the parties are making input into the document, and trying to say, okay, we thought this would happen at this COP27, it didn't happen. We thought the issue of funding for loss and damage would be finalized at this COP, it didn't happen. But I went in there to cover some of the sessions, and I was about filing the report. Where I'm sitting now is actually the media center, where all journalists of the world who are covering this event gather to file in their report to their various media stations. I was just about putting that story together before this program. And I'm trying to tell you that the COP27 presidency office is saying to those parties, even though you have issues, we're not here, we know we cannot satisfy everybody. It's not possible to satisfy over 120 countries. Now, between the 7th and 8th of
Nkoli, I'm afraid November, I need to let you go because of my time. Nkoli, I'm sorry, my time, but let me just allow you go and quickly file in your report into the newsroom. We'll be waiting to have it here today. Thanks a lot for your time and taking the time out to join us on the program today. And as you will be rounding up the program, we wish you a very safe trip back to Abuja here. All right, the program has been on the politics of climate negotiation happening in COP27. We do hope that at the end of the day, a kind of a pot to be set up to help the less wealthy country in dealing with the impacts of climate change. My name is Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your day. Sincere appreciation to the crew that made this happen. Bye.